Welcome to Restaurants Reinvented, the podcast for restaurant executives where we go beyond the four walls of the store and talk about industry, trends, strategies, and challenges that the C-suite tackles every day. Your host is Jen Kern, a career marketer across multiple industries and the CMO of QBeyond. Now let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Restaurants Reinvented. This is Jen Kern. I'm the hostess of the show here. And I'm very excited today to have a female CTO in our podcast series. So Kelly MacPherson is here from USHG. Welcome, Kelly.
Well, thank you. So excited to be here. It's been a long planning, so I'm glad we're finally here.
Yeah, I know, right? I was actually reflecting when I was putting together some of the topics today. I was like, we were introduced by Zach Oates, the infamous Zach Oates, like two years ago or so.
Almost 3.
Yeah,
almost 3. If you can believe that.
You sit on his board, right, for Ovation?
Yeah. I sit on the advisory board. He's fantastic, salt of the earth, good person,
absolutely,
and great products. Give him the plug on the product too.
Oh, good. Well, I haven't seen a lot of it, but I've heard good things about it, and he's fantastic. So I'm very, very grateful that he connected us. As you know, I've been doing a CTO Trailblazer series. So started out the podcast a couple of years ago with marketers, and then we pivoted and we did a labor series during the pandemic. We've kind of bobbed and weaved and done different series here. But of late, I've been doing CTOs, and that's why I'm so excited you're here, because you'll be my second female CTO out of about 8 folks that I've had on the show so far. They've all been fantastic. No gender biases whatsoever. But it is rare to see a female CTO in the space. So before we get started, just a quick background bio, if you don't mind giving folks some of your background and experience. I know you've been in the industry and on different sides of the fence, so to speak. You've been in tech, you've been with different brands from fast casual to quick service, and now you're at, I believe it would be called a fine dining establishment, right? With the infamous Danny Meyer. So if you can give us some quick background, and then we'll get right into it.
Yeah, it's hard to do quick over. I just realized this year that I'm in my 30th year in the industry. So I'm not to date myself, but it goes back a long way. But I started in restaurant operations way back when, and my family had a bar and restaurant growing up. So hospitality and restaurants were always in my blood, and really got introduced into tech by happen circumstance. When I was with Planet Hollywood, I became the on-site expert at point of sale. There was no internet at the time, and quickly found out I had a knack for it and started doing openings. And that was the catalyst for my tech career. And I think it's worked out pretty well since, but, just obsessive about both the employee and guest experience and working across different verticals within the restaurant industry of looking at ways to, again, just making everybody's lives better every day. And I think that's what's brought the most joy. And so spent some time at Planet Hollywood was the first that I mentioned, left and went over to Hard Rock Cafe and spent almost 9 years there leading tech. I've been doing some amazing things, and then kind of shifted over to Abercrombie & Fitch on the retail side. And people always talk about the transition, but at the time, Hard Rock is majority of the revenue is retail based. And so it was more of a natural transition, and wanted the growth and scale of a public company. But I can tell you I missed hospitality and missed restaurants, and ended up going to be the CIO at Burger King, and then, formed RBI in, one Burger King, and 3G acquired Tim Hortons and took over and spent almost 7 great years there, and then was going to retire. And I think that's the interesting part at the end of COVID. I was going to take some time, travel, enjoy, do all the things I talked about doing, and COVID hit. And I found myself staring at my husband every day, and I love him to death, but I was bored, and I could see all the fury that was happening of what the industry was going through and things that were happening. And so I wanted to be back in the game, right? And I wanted to get back into the industry. And I met Zach at Ovation and started doing some startup, advisory work, really focused on seeing the struggles of what the small business and kind of mid-market restaurants were having during the pandemic, and kind of this quick dynamic shift to get into omni-channel. So we could talk about that later. And then started consulting and got the, privilege and pleasure of working with Union Square Hospitality Group. And during the middle of the pandemic, when all the restaurants in New York were closed, to help them with their tech strategy, and fell in love with the company and the culture and did exactly what I said I wasn't going to do and go back full time. And 3 years later, here I am. And so it's kind of the long answer to the short journey, but somewhere in the middle of there, I spent a little bit of time on the micro side. And I think we could talk about that later on too, but just grateful for all the opportunities that I've had so far that this industry has given to me. So for me, it's about giving back.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that and for giving back. I mean, we talk about this a lot on the show, that a lot of us get bit by that hospitality bug. And I was kind of chuckling to myself looking at your background as well, because I noticed you went into retail and then, had a few different pieces of the business. And then you ended up back, like you said, in hospitality. And there really is something just so lovely about it. There's just no other industry really like it. I found this industry later, in my career, and I've been here 4 years now, and I can't imagine anything else really. So I understand that for sure. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, early on in your career, when you became the CIO at Burger King, I have to imagine there weren't that many female CIOs.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time there definitely, I think it still is today in our industry, right? If you go to the trade shows or you walk the floors or go to some of the events, I think you're starting to see more and more women in the industry. But, even in my early days at Hard Rock, it was a very male-dominated industry. I remember going to the FS Techs back then or some of the other conferences, and I was one of few. But I think as the industry has embraced more technology, you started to see outward industry leaders come into the industry as well. You're starting to develop a really strong network of female leaders within hospitality. It's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen a change just in the 4 years that I've been here. More women in the C-suite, for sure.
We need more.
Yeah, we do need more. We always need to push for more.
Yeah.
So are there some ways that you're helping and driving that at Union Square?
Yeah, I mean, you think what's really exciting if you look at our C-suite, and I think it's just indicative of who we are as well, too. We have a female chief administration officer, chief legal counsel, CFO, CMO, and myself on the executive team. So the female leadership definitely outweighs the males in the room, but it's a great balance. And I think it's really about finding the right person for the position, right? And it's also about women supporting each other.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So here you are 3 years in at Union Square Hospitality Group, and they managed to bring you out from retirement. So that couldn't have been that easy, even though I can understand that being a little bored, right? I can imagine. What's it been like for the last 3 years?
I mean, it's amazing. And then obviously, if you look at, like I said, I started when the restaurants were closed. And so I was remote, hadn't really met anybody in person, and I wasn't able to come to New York for several months after I started. But, immediately working with the team and kind of the culture and the passion, and, still to this day, Danny is so inspirational and so amazing, as well as Chip, our CEO, and really the focus on how do we make our employees' lives better, and the concept of enlightened hospitality and everything. If you've read Setting the Table and kind of the way we operate, and it's our playbook. And so seeing that connection to the culture, I fell in love right away, and it was hard not to kind of jump in and be part of that. It's pretty special.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that has surprised you that you didn't expect? I mean, obviously going into that, it's hard to be able to anticipate. And I've heard one of your terms recently is anticipatory hospitality, which I'd love to learn about. But is there anything that surprised you a little bit that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we came in, and again, being a very chef-driven organization, and it's very different I think for me is, I was dealing with one brand of many, right? And so you look at scale that way, where in the group within USHG, we have many brands of one. And so it becomes a little bit more challenging when you start to look at building out a really solid tech infrastructure and a customer experience, because you've got the group, but you also have very identifiable, unique individual restaurants and brands that you're supporting. And so we had some work to do from a point of sale, like some of the components of standardization of point of sale, and some bringing in some kind of more umbrella type programs, if you will, so that we can look at the business as a whole, right? And looking at it. And so we had some work to do in that space. And as we were going through the pandemic, and so there were some challenges that went along with that as well.
Mm-hmm. And so how are you? So you're effectively talking about a multi-brand scenario, right? And having a platform or a foundation for your technology infrastructure that can serve all those brands.
We have an events business, we have different facets of the organization. And I think you going back to the thing that surprised me, I probably didn't understand the depth and the complexity of the business, if you will. And so when you talk about we're fine dining, but we also have more bar-focused restaurants, we have fast casual. And so you almost touch every vertical within the portfolio, as well as events and catering, and building out those common platforms. And so we started to look at modernization of the architecture and the tech, and looking at, where we should focus on in the way we build our tech strategies, looking at first and foremost the employee experience, and understanding North Star, what that looks like, right, across each one of the personas, if you will, of an hourly employee, a manager, a corporate office employee. Where are all the touch points, and where can we really drive a mobile first strategy, and putting information and putting systems in their hands that, overused word, frictionless and seamless, and it kind of goes across with all experiences, but really making it so, not focused on mundane tasks, work and technology, enable that side of it. And then we took the guest experience and started to look at all the way from discovery all the way through exit phase of the dining experience. And again, where can tech enable our teams to do what they do best, and that's servicing the guests. And so you'll hear me talk a lot about how do you bring the science of technology and the art of hospitality together to drive an even more memorable and personal experience. And that's been our mission. And so when we started to look at how we layer in the technology to that, where were the components that were going to have the biggest impact, and how do we then achieve that vision or that North Star that we were looking at for both those two different experiences.
That's beautiful. The science of technology and the art of hospitality, marrying those two things together. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I think makes the industry so fun. There's so many challenges right now with everything that's going on with the digital transformation, but you still have hospitality, and hospitality.
It's still the human connection, right? That's not going to go away. That's the differentiator.
Yeah. Yeah. So I read an article recently where you talked about that term, anticipatory hospitality. What did you mean by that, and how did you come up with that?
Yeah, it's an extension of what we always talk about, and Danny talks about in setting the table of enlightened hospitality. How do you create personal moments for our guests, right? How do you go above and beyond? And so when we talk about anticipatory hospitality, if you start to look at, when I talk about that guest journey from discovery all the way to exit, how do I know so much about Jan when she comes into one of our restaurants that we can then anticipate, read her signs, understand, kind of what your likes and dislikes are, and create memorable experiences that are really one-to-one for you, right? And so a lot of people talk about, again, terms personalization, but being able to deliver that in a way that is meaningful. And so, I'll give you an example. I happen to be a big wine lover. If you're a wine lover and you're a big, Napa Cab drinker, a much better experience if the som can come over to you with a couple bottles, maybe something that you drank last time, and maybe something that they think based on your profile that you might like, and have a one-to-one conversation about wine, as opposed to just always dropping off a book. Right. And so being able to anticipate those moments for each individual coming into the restaurant to create that even more elevated experience. And that's what we're striving for. And that's for marrying the science of the data and the analytics with, again, the art of what the teams do in the restaurant.
Absolutely.
And so the tech becomes the enabler. It's never going to replace that human connection, but how can I empower our teams to be able to, again, deliver on what they do best.
Yeah. And is that example a real example? Is that something you've been able to do at one of your restaurants?
We're getting close. Yeah.
We're mature.
We're doing it already. Right.
Yeah.
And so we're continuing to develop in more sophisticated ways every single day. Right. And so I think that's when you start to get into some of the advancements of analytics that come into play. But no, we talk a lot about always be collecting dots to always be connecting dots. Use, Union Square and they've been doing that for 30 plus years since they've been in business. And it's just, again, how do we continue to use the science to be able to make that much more efficient for our restaurants?
Right. I mean, that really is the opportunity area, right? Is that personalization that you talked about. And it's, to me, it's about the surprise and delight.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we talk about personalization, hyper-personalization. It's like, we don't really expect that as guests in this industry because it just has never happened unless you're going to the same restaurant every week, same night, same way. Then they might be able to do that. But in the technology-fueled era that we're living in now, where people tend to go to a lot of different restaurants in different cities, it's very, very difficult. And the expectation, I think the bar is quite low. And so I feel like any brand that's able to deliver some sort of personalization is going to completely surprise and delight the guest.
And I think if you do it in a very authentic, real way. And so I think the bar is set high at Union Square Hospitality Group and the expectation is there, but how do we even take it to the next level, right?
Yeah.
And doing it in a very authentic way that, is part of our ethos in how we do business on an everyday life. And again, it's never about the tech replacing that human connection. It's how can I empower the teams to give them, put the information or the data or the insights in their hands so that they can have that one-to-one connection, right? And so I think that's really important.
And how do the employees receive it? I mean, you started out talking about being employee obsessed, and you've said employee before the guest as you've been talking about that. And I think that's a shift we saw that happened in the pandemic, that we realized, wow, we've not only underinvested in our tech, we've underinvested in our people. And when you were just talking earlier about building that tech foundation, you said, starting with the employee. And so how are the employees receiving that? And when it comes down to that personalization and being able to arm them with the data so they can actually deliver on that, have you seen any changes in the 3 years you've been there and being able to equip them better?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you look at the virtuous cycle of enlightened hospitality, it's employees come first, right? And we firmly believe in that. And, that's been evident throughout throughout kind of the history of Union Square Hospitality Group. And for us from a tech perspective is how do you I think mobile first strategy of even things like, we've partnered with 7 shifts to mobile clock in and out and having them have access to schedules and everything that they need in communications from a mobile device, right? And bringing that kind of tech forward and from a scheduling and communication perspective, I think really important. But it's also when you start to look at it is, I think there's 2 parts. I think there's the part of talking about the guest data and how do we kind of surface that up in a more efficient manner and put that in their hands. Like I said, I've been in restaurants and I've been doing this for a long time. And, and the mindset hasn't shifted from where it was, 30 years ago when I was working to now is how do you get managers out of the back office? So they're not in the back office trying to crunch numbers, trying to key things in twice. And so I think when you look at it is when you start to look at the tech stack, right? You start to look at all the different tools that you use. How do you get that seamless movement of data throughout the system? So you're getting rid of the mundane tasks. So you're taking all that kind of friction away from the teams. And so I think as we've started to modernize the infrastructure and looking at the tech stack, we've been able to do that, right? And so you're not spending crazy amounts of time, re-adding employees across different systems, and just like simple things go a long way to kind of take some of that, just nuances away from the teams. And I think, so those things I think are really important. And then also the big focus has been on analytics and data and how do we, and we talk a lot about internally and when we're on this mission and I want to change the way we talk about analytics as well, too, as we start to look at it, is because I think we all generally get what happened, right? So I was trained early on in my career. We all look at a P&L. Were you up? Were you down? We all know the what, and pretty easy to get. But starting to look at that data journey and transitioning to storytelling so that I can understand why it happened. And then more importantly, what am I going to do about it? And so analytics and looking at, we've built a team of, a data scientist team in looking and making the investments in analytics so that we could really understand business performance and really understand opportunities, not only from a cost savings, but where we can drive traffic. How can we activate marketing to drive more, promotions or one-to-one or, on areas of focus. And so that's been a big push. And so I want to change the way we deliver reporting out too. And I think when we talk about what's next, how people consume data, and then how can we bring data to life in a story that's meaningful, that can actually drive a result. And so that's one of the missions that we're on as well too. And I think absolutely critical to kind of future success of where we're headed.
Right. Well, the storytelling with the data is, you're really onto something there, right? Because data does tell a story, and
it should, right?
Yeah, it should, right? It's maybe easier said than done.
Yep.
But we often talk about like, okay, once you have that story, how do you action it, right? Yep. And that theme has come up with a lot of the CTOs. It's not just collecting, organizing, and finding the data, but everyone's trying to figure out, okay, how can I shorten that duration between when I'm getting my hands around the data and making sense of the data and telling the story to actually doing something about it. And I think that's where the lag has typically been. By the time the story's evident, the guest has moved on to something else.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that?
I think it's a journey, like we said, right? And so I think it's and so under my team, and I think I also head up our supply chain team, and I also head up analytics, right? So less on the tech, but more on the business performance, true analytics. But it's first and foremost, it was important for that team to become trusted advisors. Very small team, but very, very mighty team. Trusted advisor with our operators, right? And understanding the business and being able to go beyond just producing reports, bringing the narrative and having those discussions of where are we seeing problems, where do we have opportunities, and being able to collectively and collaborate with them on where we can win, right? And so I think that's important. And then I'm embarking on it, and I'm just starting to have the conversations as we start to think about the future. The way we've evolved and changed about the way we consume data and the way that we learn is changing, right? One of the team members came up last week and said, oh, well, we want to change the dashboard. I'm like, my head exploded. I'm like, how many more times are we going to change the dashboard? Like we just keep reinventing the same data with different pictures and different dashboards. And maybe we should not scrap it, but maybe we should take a step back and go, are people learning differently than they were 10 years ago or when, and a lot of great tools out there from a visualization perspective, but is there a better way to do it? And so we're starting to have those discussions about maybe we just change the game and maybe it's a podcast. Maybe we deliver analytics through a podcast every month. Like think about what tech can bring to that and give people different avenues to learn. Most people are learning off of YouTube today or video. Is there a different way of delivering the data that's going to resonate with people that we spend less time collating reports and more time analyzing it? And so that's what gets me excited about where some of the AI tools and ChatGPT and these other things are going to come into play of really, truly kind of transforming that journey. So that's what we're working on. It's exciting.
Well, that is really exciting. Yeah. And that's, a few things you mentioned there have been common themes. Don't be afraid to throw it all out and start again.
Yep.
So some of my most invigorating moments in terms of my work is when I start with a blank slate. It's like, I love challenging just because that's the way we've always done it, AKA to your dashboard comment, doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way to always do it. And as you said, there's so many new technologies and different ways to disseminate information now. The idea of having a podcast for analytics is pretty interesting thought, right? That's a very cool thought. and I think it was Darian Bates. Yes, it was Darian who was on a few seasons ago, and he said, or a few episodes ago, and he said, dashboards are where the data goes to die.
Yeah.
He wrote an article about that.
That's
that was the title. Dashboards are where data goes to die. Oh, tell me about that. That's really interesting, you know? So you reminded me of that when you made your dashboard comment. And then you talked about, ever since you started in the industry, one of the goals has been to get the manager out of the back and into the, effectively making the manager more effective in their job and efficient.
Yep.
And that kind of makes me think about the movement towards automation and AI and how are we able to automate processes in the restaurant. So what are the processes you're really looking at automating? I would imagine it's different at Union Square than it would be at like a Burger King, right? The types of process you're automating. What are the ones you're looking at automating right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, I think you look at the entire life, the employee cycle. So all the way from onboarding, all the way to provisioning within the POS, right? And making sure that there's a seamless flow. And I think integrations are a big part of that, right? And making sure that the way we look at it is if anybody's rekeying the same information more than once or entering it once, then we're not doing our job. And so really working with and looking at as we're designing our tech stack to make sure we have that modularity and that interconnectivity. And I think going back to, COVID, I think that's one of the positives, if you can even say there's a positive that came out, maybe the silver linings out of the industry, is that you started to see this collaboration against partners, that people started to open up, right? And there had to be this integration because people were, it was just getting so complicated to try and, connect all the different systems together. And so I think when we look at its automation of that kind of that experience, we, tip pool automation, anything to do around those types of things I think are really important, but also looking at how do we use forecasting and tools and some kind of ML work that we've done in terms of how do we start to do better forecasting or prediction of, product in terms of production. So you look at our daily provisions brand, we bake crawlers every day. And so how can I use tools and the data and the science to then push that into telling people what their production by hour is going to be, like when to start kicking things off. And I think just, again, using the tools and the technology, but also important, the data to really drive the efficiencies within the restaurant. So you spend, again, freeing people up to do what they do best, and whether that's a back of the house or the front of the house teams. And so those are just some of the examples that we're looking at from an automation perspective.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I've heard a lot about the tip pooling efficiencies and just, making those employees more efficient for sure. We talked about omni-channel too. So what are the channels? I mean, I imagine you're mostly, in person, but do you also have a lot of digital business?
One of our brands, Daily Provisions, is more of a habitual daily fine casual business that is very heavily reliant on digital. And then we have a couple other brands. We have Marta that has a pretty fair, online presence as well from an ordering perspective. And then our Blue Smoke, which does a lot of catering and online ordering as well too. And so we've had to evolve over that, through the pandemic. During the, pre-pandemic, very little was digital. And so we had to create the omni-channel experience. We partnered with Olo to really look at delivering that. And then, with our daily provisions concept, really focused on loyalty, rewards. And so we've been working with a tech company, Thanks, over the course of the last, I think, 18 months now to help deliver that elevated experience and create more of a, loyalty for that brand. So we're very excited about those initiatives.
That's great. Yeah, they're great. They're great partners for us as well.
Yeah.
Work with most of the companies you've mentioned, and just the whole way that we've been shifting more. You mentioned the open APIs, right? And integrations and companies being able to work together in an easier fashion to be able to automate some of this. So, we talked about some of these trending topics. We talked about omnichannel, open API, personalization. And then there's the connected restaurant, which I think, I saw you use that term probably early on. You were probably one of the first to use the term. And how do you think we're doing overall as an industry on delivering the connected restaurant?
That's a loaded question. I think we've come a long way, right? And I think if we said we're there, I think that would be unrealistic, because I also think it's something that's going to continue to evolve and grow. And I think it's, in truth, again, these many decades I've been doing this, right? There's been this pendulum shift and this ongoing debate of best in class versus kind of all in one, and what's the best way to approach it. And my answer to when people ask me the question, I said, it always depends, right? I'm a believer in best in class, especially with kind of the way technology has evolved, and having some modularity, because just like anything else, sometimes as companies grow and develop, and you might outgrow a component of the connected restaurant ecosystem or the tech stack. And so being able to kind of seamlessly, every tech person in the world is going to hate that I said that, seamlessly take a component out and add something else in without having to deal with a ton of technical debt that's going to hold you back from an innovation perspective, right? And I think that's one of the opportunities that we have. And so there just might be a component. And so if you're kind of tied into this all encompassing, and you want to change a component, you're probably less likely to change it because it's going to be so difficult, because you have to reevaluate everything else. And I think the advancement of tech has given us more flexibility to be able to evolve and grow. And again, change is change, and change is difficult, but it lets you see things in kind of a different light. And so the connected restaurant is really about how do you connect everything that happens within a restaurant, because Zach and I wrote the Table for 10 book to show all the different components of the tech that goes in a restaurant. And most people probably don't appreciate that, haven't worked in restaurants, all the complexity that goes into it. How do you make all those seamlessly work together without creating the friction? And so that's really what the connected restaurant is about.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the quotes I wrote down, you said, the connected restaurant is a robust ecosystem that enables seamless flow of data to all the components of the restaurant. So again, the components, the way that you're talking about it, I feel like it's a more modular approach. You definitely need to have a strong or a modern architecture, an open architecture to enable that. The quote that I've heard, or the stat that I've heard, is that most restaurants have between 15 and 20 different technology systems. Is that the case at USHG?
Probably around 10.
Okay.
I'm probably forgetting a few, right? Like if you start to add them up. So yeah, that's probably fair. That's definitely
who's
probably
counting?
fair.
Who's counting?
Exactly.
So what gets you excited today?
It's for me, I get excited about, like we talked about, of like reimagining and reinventing the way we look at data and analytics, and really what that impact can have. And again, first and foremost on the employee experience, but also the guest experience, right? And so marrying the science with the art. And I just think that the opportunities are endless, right? I get excited about mentoring young professionals kind of into hospitality. And it's always fun when you're interviewing for positions and people come from inside the industry, and just realize they get the bug, they get the hospitality bug, and just see, again, it's how cool tech can be in terms of playing a role in restaurants and hospitality. And so that gets me excited every day.
Yeah. So other than the brands at Union Square, what are some of your favorite restaurants to frequent?
That's a great question. There's so many. Yeah. My husband loves to cook, so he tends to do all the cooking in the family. So my kitchen is always a good place to hang out. Like I said, I'm a big sushi fan, so anytime I can have some sushi, it's amazing. I spend time. We live in Napa, so the French Laundry is always up there as well too. But I'm definitely biased because I think we have some of the best restaurants in the world. So
Yeah.
No shortage of when I'm here in New York and I call my husband and I'll say, oh, I have to go. And he's like, really? You have to go? I'm like, no, I don't. I want to go. And so our chefs are amazing. Our teams are amazing. And even, I'm around it every day. Every time I go in the restaurant, I really feel the enlightened hospitality come through and what the teams do. And it's fun to watch and see him be a part of.
Right. Well, usually there's a phrase, you can't pick your favorite kid, it's like taboo. But maybe if you looked across the brands at Union Square, would you have a favorite?
No, they all are right. That would be like picking my favorite. They're also unique. And so they're all just amazing in their own way. So
yeah,
we'll stick with that. No picky favorite.
Okay. I'll just have to try each one.
You have to try everyone. Exactly.
So looking back, at your experience, you've been in the fast casual, in your Burger King days, and you mentioned spending time. Did you work at Tim Hortons or not?
Yeah, so RBI owned Tim Hortons, Popeyes, and Burger King. Yeah.
What do you think some of the greatest changes have been that we've made in the past few years in the industry across, whether it's fast casual, QSR, or the finer dining?
Yeah. I mean, I really believe it's about the changes of the embracement of technology, right? And I think the COVID, again, was a catalyst for that. And, it's the adoption of tech within the restaurants, and then the desire and the want for the tech and the demand for it, I think has changed the way we all think and the way that we all operate. And so I think when you look at some of the advancements from a lot of the startups and the cloud architecture and kind of modernizing the tech stack has really enabled just creating different experiences across the industry, right? Think about pay at the table. It allowed people to start embracing things that I think were a little bit slow from an adoption perspective pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
We're not letting up. I think just that now it's just this continued demand for more. And so I think it's really exciting.
Definitely. How about some of your favorite memories?
Oh, goodness. Is it bad that you remember, I learned networking my first, so think about it, in a hotel room in Maui on Kaanapali Beach at the Hyatt, setting up for Planet Hollywood Treaty. Micro 8700, really dating myself. I had no idea. I was reading a book, and for some reason I had them deliver all the equipment to my hotel room. So I unboxed an entire restaurant full of POS and tried to set up servers. I think the maid if it was today, people would get worried because I had computer equipment everywhere, and that's how I learned how to read. That's how I learned my first attempts at networking. And I remember every time somebody printed something, the kitchen printers went down and hours on the phone. But to me, those were learning opportunities. I think all my favorite memories are just seeing once you make a change and people get over that kind of aha moment of change and just seeing people embrace it. And so I have a number of those across my career where people go, oh, this is cool. This makes sense. Right. And it's not change is change. And it's always a little bit tough, but just seeing the wins and seeing the partnerships and the collaboration with the teams. I remember at Burger King, I had said, I'll get really excited when I see the rest of the business kind of hanging around the tech team. And I remember just kind of looking up one day and seeing everybody having conversations with the business partner and the tech. And I kind of went, oh, this is pretty cool, right? We're partners. And so I think those are really good feelings.
Yeah, that's so nice. That's really nice. And you mentioned you like mentoring folks today in the industry. What is some of the advice that you give to younger folks coming up in the industry, or maybe people coming into the industry for the first time? Can you share some of your mentorship tips?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first one is, it's know your value. I think it's really important. And I think that the one advice, and I was at a conference and sitting down with somebody not too long ago, and they were on the cusp of trying to figure out what they wanted to do, and they were having a difficult time, I'm talking about compensation or kind of value and kind of what they were worth. And, my advice is unfortunately, go back to our conversation, we're not all Derek Jeter and had agents or LeBron and having people fight for us. So you have to be your own agent, right? And I think that's first and foremost as you're kind of going through your career is you got to know what you want and being able to advocate for yourself and not just sit back and wait for something always to happen kind of to you and be that voice. And I think that's really important. And I think the other advice, and I take it from my own career, is, I had this idea or vision that I was going to go to Wall Street. My background is finance and economics, and, the world threw me opportunities and different windows and, different challenges. And sometimes what you think you're going to do, it veers. And so when opportunity presents itself, it might seem odd, but sometimes it's worth the risk and not to be afraid of kind of going down a different path sometimes.
Yeah, staying open.
It's so important.
Staying open. Opportunities do present themselves.
And
it doesn't always mean we need to take them.
Don't always have to take them, right? But
yeah,
at least be open to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kelly, I really appreciate your time here today. As we close, I wanted to see if there's any community shout outs. I know you mentioned you like giving back and you're dedicating this age of your career for that. And so if there's any shout outs you wanted to give to some of your favorite organizations, I know you're sitting on a lot of boards and a lot of tech boards. Any closing thoughts or comments from you?
For your listeners, one of the things I like to do is if anybody has questions or wants to chat, they can find me on LinkedIn. And I might not always have all the answers, but I'm never going to be short of an opinion. So happy to share guidance or, connect with people. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your time today. I know our listeners will appreciate it and appreciate the offer for outreach, just like as I reached out to you. And you very graciously complied as I followed up time and time again. So I know you're super busy and appreciate everything you're doing for the industry. And just thank you for helping to reinvent restaurants.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Restaurants Reinvented. This show is brought to you by Q, a restaurant tech company paving a brighter future for operators with the industry's first unified commerce platform. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow Restaurants Reinvented in your favorite podcast app or visit qbeyond.com, that's QUBEYOND.com /podcast to find all of your latest episodes.